The hotel banquet hall was decorated with polished precision, the kind that corporate evenings always seemed to demand. White linen tablecloths stretched perfectly flat across round tables, each crowned with a modest centerpiece of candles and lilies. Soft amber lighting cast a warm glow over the polished parquet floor, where colleagues in formal suits and glittering dresses moved between the buffet, the bar, and the dance floor. Conversations hummed in the air like an indistinct melody. Laughter, clinking glasses, the occasional outburst of applause when someone made a joke loud enough to carry across the room. I should have been at ease. The company was doing well, promotions had been given, new projects celebrated, and it was the sort of evening meant to encourage camaraderie and team spirit. Megan looked stunning in a dark emerald dress that caught the light when she moved, her hair pinned elegantly back, a glass of champagne in her hand. She had always known how to fit perfectly into these events. Poised, confident, approachable. I watched her with a mixture of pride and unease, though at the time I couldn't have said why. It was when the music shifted into a slower, more rhythmic track that my chest tightened. I noticed Megan rise from her chair, laughing at something Tyler, one of her colleagues from the marketing department, had said. He stood with her, tall and assured, his tie loosened just enough to look relaxed but still professional. Together they drifted toward the dance floor. At first, it seemed innocent. A quick dance, something lighthearted among co-workers. But within moments, I saw the boundaries blur. Megan laughed again, tilting her head back slightly as Tyler leaned in closer. Their hands met, and instead of a polite clasp, her fingers lingered against his. They moved in sync with the music, but their closeness was far more than the tune required. Tyler's hand rested at her waist, guiding her with ease, and Megan did not resist. She leaned into it. From where I stood, the space between them seemed non-existent, their bodies shifting together like people who had done this before, who knew each other's rhythm too well. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, that it was just a dance at a corporate event where people loosened up after months of pressure and deadlines. Yet something in Megan's expression unsettled me. The way she smiled wasn't just casual amusement. It was softer, private, as though it carried meaning only the two of them understood. When she lifted her hand and let it slide briefly across his shoulder, I felt my stomach drop. That wasn't a gesture of light-hearted fun. That was int asterisk Macy disguised as play. For the next few minutes, I stood frozen near the table, pretending to sip my drink while my mind spun. Around me, conversations continued as normal colleagues discussed quarterly numbers, upcoming projects, and holiday plans. No one else seemed to notice what I saw. Or perhaps they noticed but chose to look away, not wanting to intrude or to face the awkwardness of interpreting it. I envied their ignorance. My entire focus was trapped on the dance floor. Finally, the song ended, and the two of them separated with easy smiles. Tyler bowed in an exaggerated, playful way, making Megan laugh again, and she returned to her seat as though nothing unusual had happened. When she reached the table, she touched my shoulder lightly, the way she often did, and asked if I wanted another drink. Her tone was breezy, casual, as if the last 5 minutes had been just another moment in an ordinary evening. I forced a smile, nodded, and excused myself to the bar. But the unease gnawed at me, a sharp edge under the polished surface of the night. Later, when we finally left and returned home, I could not let it go. The image of her with Tyler played again and again in my mind, like a loop I could not stop. When I asked her about it, trying to keep my voice calm, she didn't hesitate for a second. "It was just a harmless dance," she said, her tone even, her expression unreadable. She gave a short laugh, as though I had made a silly observation, something unworthy of being taken seriously. Then, with the kind of confidence that can silence doubt, she added that I was simply being jealous, imagining things, letting suspicion poison a perfectly normal evening. Her words stung, not because they were harsh, but because of how smoothly they came out, like a rehearsed line, polished to dismiss any question. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to take her word and let the unease dissolve. But it didn't. If anything, her confidence unsettled me more. There was no flicker of guilt in her eyes, no awkwardness, no attempt to soften the blow with reassurance. Instead, she moved around the bedroom with easy composure, changing out of her dress, humming softly to herself, as though the conversation barely mattered. She acted like someone who knew exactly how to deflect and redirect, leaving no room for argument. I lay awake that night long after she had fallen asleep, listening to her even breathing in the dark. The knot in my chest remained, heavy and unyielding. I told myself I was overthinking, that fatigue and a couple of glasses of wine had distorted what I saw. But the truth was simpler and harsher. Something had shifted in that banquet hall, and I could not ignore it. The event had been intended as a celebration, a way to strengthen bonds within the company. For me, it became the first crack in the carefully built image of our marriage. One dance, one smile, one hand held too long, small details to anyone else. But for me, they were the start of a shadow I could not shake off. As the days passed, the memory refused to fade. I replayed the scene while driving to work, while sitting at my desk, while standing in the shower. I tried to focus on ordinary life, but my mind kept returning to the dance floor, to the closeness between Megan and Tyler, to the way she had dismissed my concern without hesitation. The more I thought about it, the more the discomfort grew. It wasn't only the dance itself. It was the way she had brushed me off, with a calm certainty that left no space for questions. A partner who had nothing to hide would have reassured me, laughed it off gently, maybe even teased me in good humor. But Megan had looked directly at me, accused me of jealousy, and ended the conversation with a finality that silenced any further words. That was not the response of innocence. That was the response of someone guarding a truth. And so, though nothing outward had changed between us, I carried that unease like a secret weight. At work, among friends, even at home, I wore the same mask as always. But inside, I knew. Something had big asterisk in that night, a slow unraveling, invisible to others, but clear as daylight to me. After the corporate evening, life on the surface went on as usual. Megan rose early, dressed for work with the same practiced routine, and left the house with a confident step. We ate breakfast together, exchanged polite words about schedules and errands, and played our parts as though nothing had shifted. Yet for me, everything had changed. The dance I witnessed had planted a seed of doubt, and that seed grew quietly but relentlessly. At first, I told myself to forget it. One dance was not enough to accuse someone of betrayal. People laughed and touched lightly at social events all the time. But memory is a cruel companion. It brings back fragments, details long ignored, and stitches them into something larger. Soon, I found myself remembering every strange moment of the last few months, and together they formed a pattern I could no longer dismiss. Megan had always been open with her phone, leaving it on the kitchen counter or coffee table, screen lighting up with messages I never bothered to read. But lately, the device never left her side. It followed her into the bathroom, into the bedroom, even to the garden when she stepped outside for air. And when it lay on the table, it was always face down, as if the screen itself had become forbidden. I noticed, too, that the password had changed. Once, we had shared access without question. Now, I no longer knew the code. When I asked casually about it, she laughed, saying she had changed it for work security. It was plausible enough, but the ease with which she delivered the answer reminded me too much of that night in the banquet hall. Clothes were another detail I had ignored until then. Megan began buying dresses, shoes, and perfumes that didn't fit the life we lived. For years, her wardrobe had been practical, stylish, yes, but designed for the office or for family dinners. Lately, though, I noticed pieces that looked designed for evenings out. Silk dresses, glittering heels, perfumes with heavy, sensual notes that clung to her skin long after she returned home. Strangely, I never saw her wear those items around me. They appeared, vanished, and returned only faintly on her, in the scent that lingered when she walked through the door late at night. Her schedule, too, shifted in subtle but steady ways. Dinners she once shared with me became team outings or working evenings. At first, it was once every few weeks, then once a week, then more often. Each time she would come home late, offering a quick explanation. A project that had dragged on, a client who had stayed too long, a colleague who needed support. She always arrived with that same tired smile, polished but not genuine, as if it had been practiced in the car before she opened the front door. I also began to notice how she left the room when her phone buzzed. Once, she would answer freely even in front of me. Now, she slipped into the hallway, or the balcony, or even out to her car under the excuse of better reception. The calls were short, but her voice carried a warmth, a lightness, that I hadn't heard directed at me for months. When she returned, she acted as though nothing had happened, sitting beside me on the couch, asking about my day, her face an unreadable mask. In bed, too, there was a difference. We had once shared closeness that came naturally, with laughter, with ease. But now she was distant. Sometimes she seemed distracted. Other times she offered an affection that felt exaggerated, as though compensating for something left unspoken. It was a strange duality, either too little or too much, but never what it used to be. I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was losing my mind, if suspicion itself was distorting reality. The more I thought about it, the more old memories surfaced, things I had overlooked at the time. The sudden business trip she had taken last spring, when she claimed she was filling in for a sick colleague. The unexplained cash withdrawals from ATMs near the city center, where she had no regular meetings. The new friends she mentioned in passing, people I had never met, whose names never came up again. I remembered the times she returned home flushed, claiming exhaustion, yet smelling not of sweat and stress but of fresh perfume, as though she had reapplied it minutes before walking through the door. Even her digital life had shifted. Our shared calendar, once meticulously updated with dinners, family events, and appointments, had **n to empty. Weeks would pass without her adding a single detail, and when I asked, she brushed it off with a vague smile, saying she was too busy to track everything. On her social media, photos of us slowly disappeared, replaced with curated images of landscapes, office events, and **ts of wine glasses at dimly lit restaurants. I was still in her life, but no longer in her picture. These details gnawed at me quietly, building like drops of water against stone. On the outside, nothing erupted. I said nothing, did nothing, continued my routines. We went to dinner with friends, visited her family, attended social gatherings, and smiled together in photos. No one looking from the outside would have guessed the storm growing inside me. But within, the doubt had sunk its roots deep. I felt it when she walked through the door later than expected, when she laughed at her phone in another room, when she left the house with a perfume I hadn't smelled before. Each moment was like a needle, small but sharp, impossible to ignore. There is a strange cruelty in suspicion. It corrodes quietly, leaving you unable to trust your own eyes. I questioned myself daily. Was I imagining it? Was I projecting insecurity onto harmless events? Perhaps Tyler was just a colleague, and the dance truly had been nothing. But my mind refused to settle. Once suspicion enters, it colors everything. By midsummer, I had **n keeping mental notes. The time she left, the hour she returned, the outfits she wore, the scent she carried. I replayed her excuses in my head, comparing them, looking for cracks. I told myself it was only to find peace, to prove her innocence to myself. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was already bracing for confirmation. The strangest part was how Megan carried herself through it all. She seemed lighter, almost glowing at times, as though she carried a secret that made her feel alive. Around me, she was affectionate enough, polite enough, but there was a distance I could not cross. I felt as though I was standing at the edge of her life, watching her slip further into something I could not reach. Looking back now, it seems obvious. The signs were everywhere. But at the time, I lived in the torment of half-knowledge, where everything pointed to betrayal yet nothing could be proven. I was trapped between wanting to believe her and fearing the truth. And in that space, the doubt grew into certainty, long before the night I finally saw it with my own eyes. It happened when I least expected it, on a quiet evening when the city had already **n to wind down. The air outside was cool, carrying the faint smell of rain on asphalt. I had been restless all day, the weight of doubt pressing heavier than usual, and I decided to step outside for a walk just to clear my head. The streets in our neighborhood were dimly lit, lined with familiar houses where curtains had already been drawn and televisions glowed faintly behind glass. It was the kind of night that should have brought calm. As I turned the corner onto our street, I noticed the faint glow of headlights parked a few houses down from mine. At first, I thought nothing of it. People parked in odd places all the time. But the longer I looked, the more detail I made out. The car was familiar, though not one that belonged to any of our neighbors. My steps slowed, my breath catching as I realized I had seen it before in the company parking lot. When I once picked Megan up after a late meeting, it was Tyler's car. I froze, every nerve in my body suddenly alive. The vehicle sat idle, engine silent, but its presence was louder than any sound could have been. I moved closer, careful not to draw attention, my shoes pressing softly against the pavement. My pulse pounded in my ears. As I drew near, the shapes inside the car came into view. Megan sat in the passenger seat, her profile unmistakable in the dim light. Tyler was behind the wheel, leaning slightly toward her. They were not arguing, not even in some hurried conversation that might have explained away their meeting. Instead, they looked calm. Too calm. Megan laughed softly, her head tilted back for a moment before she leaned in closer to him. He responded with a grin, his hand resting casually on the gearshift but angled just enough toward her knee. The image was devastating in its simplicity. I wanted to look away, to tell myself I was mistaken, but the scene unfolded with deliberate clarity. Megan's hand touched his arm, a light caress that spoke of long familiarity. Then, without hesitation, she leaned across the console, and their lips met in a kiss. Not hurried, not stolen, but unhurried, practiced, as if this was something they had done many times before. It was in that instant that the fragile wall I had built inside myself collapsed. For weeks, I had tried to balance suspicion with denial, to convince myself that I was imagining things. But no explanation, no excuse, could cover what I saw with my own eyes. This was not a coincidence, not a misunderstanding. It was betrayal, clear and undeniable. I stood in the shadows, watching, unable to move. My legs felt heavy, my chest hollow, as though all the air had left me. I had thought the moment of confirmation would bring rage, some explosion of fury, but instead it brought silence. I felt emptied out, stripped of every defense. There was no drama in their gestures, no guilt in their posture. What shook me most was how ordinary it all seemed to them, as if this secret life had become their normal. After a while, Megan adjusted herself in the seat, laughing again, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear the way she always did when she felt comfortable. Tyler said something I couldn't hear, and they both smiled as if sharing some private joke. Watching them was like seeing a play where I had no role, a performance in which my life had been rewritten without my consent. I pulled back into the shadows, afraid they might see me, though a part of me wanted them to. A part of me longed to walk straight up to that car, rip the door open, and confront them with the truth they had so casually displayed. But something stronger held me back, the certainty that I no longer needed words. I had already seen enough. Eventually, the car started. The headlights flared, and Tyler drove off, the taillights disappearing into the darkness at the end of the street. I stood still long after they were gone, my body trembling not with anger but with a coldness I couldn't shake. The silence of the night pressed heavily around me. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once, then fell quiet again. The world had returned to its ordinary rhythm, but mine had shattered. When I finally walked back into the house, Megan was already there. She must have been dropped off around the corner, slipping inside as though nothing unusual had happened. The kitchen light was on, and the faint sound of running water reached me from the sink. She moved about easily, humming softly, as if the evening had been no different from any other. Her hair was slightly tousled, her lipstick faintly smudged, but she carried herself with the same composed grace I had seen countless times before. I stood in the hallway watching her from a distance. My chest felt heavy with the weight of what I had just witnessed, but she behaved as though she had come home from an ordinary dinner with colleagues. She asked if I wanted tea, her tone casual, her smile exaggerated. The kind of smile that felt like it belonged to a stage actor, not a wife. It was almost cruel, how easily she slipped into the role of a devoted partner, while I still had the image of her lips on his burned into my mind. I answered briefly, my words empty, and she carried on. To anyone else, it might have looked like a perfectly normal evening. Dinner prepared, polite conversation, small gestures of affection. But I could no longer see it that way. Every movement felt scripted, every word rehearsed, as though she had grown used to playing the part of wife for me while living another truth elsewhere. That night in bed, she rested her head on my shoulder, her breath warm against my skin. She whispered something about a stressful day, about being tired, and soon after, she fell asleep. I lay awake, staring into the dark, the sound of her even breathing filling the room. I had never felt more distant from her than in that moment. It struck me then how betrayal doesn't always come with loud confrontations or dramatic revelations. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the sight of a car parked under a dim streetlight, in the sound of laughter shared between two people who shouldn't be so close, in the slow and unhurried kiss that makes every denial meaningless. And in that quiet, I understood. My marriage was no longer built on trust but on performance. And though I hadn't yet spoken the words, something inside me had already broken beyond repair. The night after I saw Megan with Tyler in that car, the house itself felt different to me. The walls, the furniture, even the quiet hum of the refrigerator seemed to press against me with an alien weight. It was no longer a place of comfort but a stage where every gesture and word carried the texture of falseness. Megan moved through the rooms as if nothing had shifted, as though her world remained intact. But for me, the air was thick with betrayal. She cooked dinner with unusual energy, chopping vegetables with swift precision, humming a melody I didn't recognize. The sound of the knife striking the cutting board echoed through the kitchen, rhythmic, almost theatrical. The table was set with more care than usual. Candles lit, silverware aligned perfectly, a bottle of wine opened and breathing in its decanter. She smiled when I walked in, the kind of wide, warm smile one would expect from a devoted partner eager to create a pleasant evening. To anyone else, it might have looked like love. To me, it was unbearable. I could still see her in that passenger seat, laughing at Tyler's words, her lips pressed to his in a kiss that needed no explanation. The images played behind my eyes even as she placed food on the table and asked me about my day. Her tone was light, rehearsed, too polished. It was the voice of someone who knew the role she needed to play and had long practiced it. I sat across from her, forcing myself to eat, though every bite felt like ash. She filled the silence with stories from work, light anecdotes about clients, humorous remarks about colleagues, even a comment about how exhausting the new project had become. She spoke of late nights and tight deadlines, her face composed in a mask of sincerity. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed her. But now I could see the cracks beneath the performance. The words were carefully chosen, her laughter too sharp, her pauses too deliberate. Every now and then, she reached across the table, touching my hand lightly, her eyes warm, her smile tender. To anyone watching, it would have seemed like affection. To me, it was mockery. I felt like an actor forced into a play I no longer wanted to perform, reciting lines I hadn't written. She carried the illusion with ease, but I could feel the hollowness beneath it. After dinner, she suggested we watch a movie together. She curled up beside me on the couch, resting her head against my shoulder, her hands sliding across my chest in a gesture that once might have brought comfort. Now it only deepened the void. I sat stiffly, my eyes on the screen but my mind elsewhere, replaying the night before, replaying the kiss I had witnessed. Her touch felt exaggerated, like the movements of a dancer following choreography. She kissed my cheek lightly, whispered something about how much she had missed me during the day. I wanted to laugh at the cruelty of it, but I stayed silent, my chest tight with a mix of rage and despair. It wasn't that her gestures lacked tenderness. It was that they were too perfect, too practiced, stripped of the genuine warmth they once held. When the movie ended, she turned to me with an affectionate smile, asking if I wanted tea before bed. Her voice was soft, her gaze steady, as though she truly believed her role. I nodded, unable to trust my own voice. She rose gracefully, moved into the kitchen, and soon returned with 2 steaming cups. She sat close again, her hand brushing mine as she handed me the cup, her expression carefully composed. Later, in the bedroom, she seemed almost determined to erase any distance between us. She undressed slowly, deliberately, letting her dress slip to the floor with a casual elegance that once would have stirred desire in me. She climbed into bed, nestled close, and traced her fingers across my arm as though reaffirming our int asterisk Macy. Her body pressed against mine with exaggerated warmth, her lips seeking mine with insistence. I lay there, responding mechanically, my heart miles away. I could not stop seeing her in that car, could not unhear the laughter she had shared with him, could not unsee the kiss that had stripped her excuses bare. Her touch was no longer comfort but theater, a performance designed to conceal the truth. The more she tried, the more the emptiness grew inside me. When she finally fell asleep, her head resting lightly against my chest, I stared into the darkness, listening to her breathing. To her, this must have felt like an ordinary evening, or at least the illusion of one. To me, it was the confirmation that our life together had become nothing more than a performance. She played the role of a loving wife with flawless precision, but I knew the truth that lurked behind the curtain. In the days that followed, the pattern continued. Megan displayed exaggerated tenderness at every opportunity. Cooking elaborate dinners, suggesting weekend outings, slipping affectionate notes into my bag, even buying small gifts that seemed chosen to remind me of earlier years of our marriage. She touched me more often, smiled more brightly, asked about my work with unusual enthusiasm, but all of it felt rehearsed. Every gesture carried the weight of calculation, as if she were compensating for something she feared I might suspect. She had no idea that suspicion had already turned to certainty, that her efforts to play the role of devoted wife only deepened the chasm between us. I moved through those days with a strange detachment, playing my own part in silence. I answered her questions, returned her touches, smiled when expected. Outwardly, we looked like any other couple, perhaps even stronger, bound by visible tenderness. But inside, I felt only emptiness. The performance was flawless, but I was no longer an audience willing to believe the illusion. It struck me often, in quiet moments, how lonely betrayal makes you. Not just because of the act itself, but because it strips away the meaning from every gesture, every word. What once was real becomes counterfeit, and no matter how convincing the counterfeit, you can never feel it as truth again. Megan's hand on mine, her voice calling me by name, her laughter filling the kitchen. All of it had been poisoned by what I had seen. And so I drifted through those days, outwardly part of a marriage, inwardly already apart from it. I realized that our shared life had become a performance, carefully staged for appearances, with both of us reciting lines. For her, perhaps, the performance was still a way to preserve what she wanted others to see. For me, it was only proof of how far we had fallen. The house itself seemed to echo with the hollowness between us. The clink of plates at dinner, the sound of her laughter, even the rhythm of her footsteps on the floor. All of it felt staged, rehearsed, false. I wondered how long she could continue the act, how long she could pretend, not knowing that I had already seen behind the curtain. It was not rage that drove me to her tablet, not even suspicion anymore, because suspicion had long since turned into certainty. It was something colder, quieter, like the compulsion of a man who needs to see the truth laid bare in front of him, no matter how much it hurts. By then, I had already seen the kiss in the car, already endured the rehearsed tenderness at home, and yet a part of me still searched for confirmation in the form of evidence that could not be denied. I told myself I wanted clarity, but perhaps what I really wanted was to destroy any lingering chance of self-deception. Her tablet lay on the nightstand one evening when she went to shower. For weeks it had been password protected, just like her phone, but that night the screen glowed awake with a notification before she picked it up. I don't know whether she had grown careless or whether it was a stroke of chance, but the screen unlocked with the same passcode she had once used for everything. My fingers hesitated only for a moment before I entered it. What opened before me was not an inbox or a work calendar, as she might have claimed if caught. It was a photo album. At first, just thumbnails, harmless enough in appearance. But the more I scrolled, the colder I became. There they were, Megan and Tyler. Not in an office, not in a conference hall, not in any setting that could be mistaken for professional. The first image that froze me was of Megan in a hotel robe, sitting cross-legged on a bed with a glass of wine in her hand. Her smile, the kind of smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Tyler was beside her, his arm draped loosely over her shoulder, the two of them leaning together with the easy familiarity of people who had long shared private space. Another photo, the two of them standing before a fireplace in the same hotel suite, both in robes, her head resting against his chest, his chin tilted down toward her hair. The flames glowed warmly behind them, but what chilled me was the comfort in their closeness. Not furtive, not rushed, but the *Macy of people who no longer needed to hide. Then came the lake pictures. Megan and Tyler outdoors, the water behind them reflecting the sunlight. They stood close, her sunglasses tilted up, his arm firm around her waist. She looked younger there, freer, as though she had shed the weight of responsibility she carried at home. I stared at that image for a long time, wondering when she had last smiled like that with me. But it wasn't just the photos. Alongside them were *TS of messages, fragments of conversations saved as though they meant something worth keeping. I read lines that stripped away the last layer of doubt. Romantic confessions, casual declarations of love, inside jokes I couldn't understand, plans for the future. They wrote about moving to another city together, about starting fresh, about opening their own place. A restaurant? A cafe? Some joint venture that combined ambition with their private world. Megan's words in those messages carried a lightness, a fire, a devotion I had once thought belonged to us alone. I felt myself go numb as I scrolled. Page after page, image after image, message after message. It was like opening a door into a parallel life, one that had been lived alongside mine, overlapping yet separate, hidden but thriving. There was a photo of them sitting side by side on a hotel balcony at night, wine glasses raised in a silent toast. Another of Megan curled against him in a robe, laughing at something he had said, her eyes alight with joy. A video clip even, her voice soft, teasing, as she leaned into him, his hand brushing across her cheek. It was mundane in its *Macy, and that was what cut deepest. This wasn't the wild fling of a moment. It was the steady, deliberate building of another life. I sat on the edge of the bed, the tablet heavy in my hands, my breath shallow. The shower water still ran in the bathroom, and I knew she was only steps away, unaware that her secret world was unraveling in front of me. A part of me wanted to confront her right then, to fling the tablet onto the counter and demand she explain each photo, each word. But another part of me, the stronger part, remained silent. I no longer needed her explanations. I had all the answers I would ever need. When the water stopped and the sound of the shower curtain pulled back reached me, I quickly set the tablet down, face down on the nightstand where she had left it. My pulse raced, but outwardly I looked composed, sitting on my side of the bed as though nothing had changed. She emerged in her robe, steam following her, her hair damp against her shoulders. She smiled at me, that same rehearsed smile she had perfected, and asked if I was tired. I nodded, keeping my voice even, though inside I felt the ground crumble beneath me. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, the images returned. Megan in his arms, Megan in that robe, Megan smiling a smile she no longer gave me. The words from their messages burned into my mind. The dreams of another life, the shared plans, the confessions of love. I realized that I had been replaced not only in her present but in her imagined future. She was building something with him, brick by brick, while leaving me to live inside the hollow shell of what remained. In the days that followed, I carried the knowledge silently. She continued her performance. The dinners, the smiles, the carefully chosen words. But I could not unsee what I had seen. When she laughed, I remembered the video of her laughter with him. When she touched me, I remembered the photos of her body leaning against his. When she spoke of stress at work, I remembered the messages about escaping together to a new city. Every gesture became poisoned by the truth I now carried. The house grew heavier with silence. She mistook my distance for fatigue, perhaps even for acceptance of her excuses. She had no idea that I knew everything. And maybe that was what gave me a strange sense of calm. The knowledge that her performance no longer fooled me. I had seen the backstage of her life, and no curtain could ever hide it again. In those quiet hours of the night, while she slept beside me, I made a decision. There would be no confrontation, no shouting match, no desperate attempt to drag truth from her lips. I didn't need her words anymore. The truth was already mine, documented in photos, in messages, in the ease of her smile when she was with him. I no longer sought an explanation, I sought a way out. And though I had not yet acted, I knew the time was coming. The album on that tablet was more than evidence of betrayal. It was the map of her new life, one in which I no longer belonged. And once I accepted that, I began to see that my life, too, could take a new direction. One free of lies, one free of performances. The final blow came from a friend who sent me a recording of that corporate evening. On screen, Megan and Tyler's harmless dance melted into a kiss, right on the floor among colleagues. Her confident denial crumbled in an instant. Every excuse she had used was exposed as a lie. Watching it, I felt no shock anymore, only the cold clarity that there was no turning back. That video became the point of no return. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I rented a small place, gathered the photos, the messages, the video, and left a note at home. Don't call. Soon, word spread at her company. Compliance had opened an investigation. Tyler was transferred. Megan left behind in disgrace. For me, silence was liberation. I realized I didn't need revenge, only freedom. Walking out quietly became the strongest answer I could give, and the only one she would never forget.